What's good, YouTube? It's me, your boy Squid, back in this video. So, with the release of the 25th anniversary rarity collection, now that we're finally getting reprints of staples, I mean, we've never seen this before in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! The best thing that we've gotten even close to this is obviously the Mega Tins, where they, at the end of each year, literally 1 year rotation, they reprint some of the older staples, and by then, generally, the cards are rotated. Like a lot of new staples, you know, cards that have been released, the power creep has gone up, and you get like some of the reprints which are useful still in the metagame, but a lot of times the metagame has already evolved where you have to keep up and get other cards. And I think this is kind of a problem, even with the 25th anniversary rarity collection being released, there's still a lot of cards that are very, very expensive in the game that you still need, especially with Agov dropping. We now need a lot of new staples to keep up with the metagame. So even though there are cards that are being accessible, it feels like Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been a game where it's ultra expensive. Like, you always have to kind of keep up, and it's very hard for casual players or lesser competitive players to justify spending a couple of $100, maybe even $1,000 on a deck. I mean, even for competitive players, it's just very overwhelming having to constantly spend money to keep up. If you guys like playing locals, playing regionals, even YCS is keeping up with the cards. It's very, very hard, and it's very tedious. So for me, I just want to kind of talk about that and get the community's thoughts on, you know, is there any way to actually make this better? Because it feels like Konami has always been kind of going for that cash grab in terms of their product. So, I mean, if you look at the metagame right now, there are already some staples that you kind of need. They kind of can vary between decks. You don't necessarily need them in every deck, but then there are cards like Thrust that are still good enough where you would consider them potentially for a given deck, right? Just like cards like this, where Thrust is basically around $80 to $90 USD per copy, and you generally need to play 3 of this card in order to maximize the effectiveness of it. So that's already like a $240 investment just for this card. The fact that they wait a long time to reprint things, I think, is one of the most detrimental things to the actual health of the game in terms of players' accessibility, in terms of players being able to play these staples without dropping like a huge wad of cash from their wallet. We also have other staples that have been released in Agov that are very, very powerful, like SP Little Knight. So I think that's another problem, is that the power creep just gets so good, but it gets to the point where it's very hard for a company like Konami to be able to make money if they don't print better cards, right? Because if your deck is playable for like 4 or 5 years and it's still a tier 1 deck, then what's a real reason for a player to buy new cards, buy new set and product if they don't have to change their deck, right? So for them, it's kind of like they have to constantly reprint and print out new cards that are very effective and also make a huge impact on the metagame. So cards like SP Little Knight, which is $100, you need 2 of these for a lot of decks, like link-based decks like Rescue Ace. So that's another $200, and you're already at like a $500 mark just with the Thrusts and the SP Little Knights. So it's very, very difficult. And then we also have mini cards like Typhon, obviously, just like $20, you know. Like a lot of these cards are like $20-30, which I don't think is too bad. But it's more like these heavy hitters like SP Little Knight and things that you actually have to drop a bill from your wallet per copy that it gets really, really draining. And then on top of the staples that exist, there are also engines. So like the new engine cards that you could play in particular decks, it's almost like a gatekeeping way of saying that, hey, if you can't afford to buy these cards, then you cannot actually play the deck that requires them in its engine. So like Horus cards, you know, a lot of players wanted to experiment with this, but the fact that it was played at the YCS, and I don't even think these cards are that good, but still, the fact that it's played means that players will hype the price up. That's just the way the secondary market works. So these cards are already $40 a copy. So in order to play a King Sarcophagus build with horses, you have to look at dropping about $140 to actually get a playset of these, as well as the necessary cards for the horse engine. So I think that's the issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though they're reprinting things, it's not being reprinted fast enough. It's like kind of like the cards will always be worth money, but you can't really reprint things fast either, because it's not fair for players that are actually investing into these cards or into sealed product to get these cards. Because if someone already dropped $100 on an SP Little Knight, then it's not very fair for them if it gets reprinted like 3 months later or 2 months later, and all of a sudden they're looking at like a $20 card instead of 100. So they basically nagged, you know, like $80. And I think that was one thing that actually happened way back in the day with Drill Warrior, because if you guys remember around the Edison format, where Drill Warrior was actually a staple in the Quick Draw Dandy Warrior deck, and this card was originally released in the pack, but then I believe either 2 or 3 months later, the tins immediately confirmed the reprint of this card straight away, and that really, really tanked its value. So it was very, very hard. So I think since then, Konami hasn't really rushed to reprint any products when they realized that they could actually milk players from buying the product for as long as possible and then reprint them at the end of the season. Which, going back to my original point, is the fact that, you know, we're never going to be able to catch up to the actual cards that are good in the metagame, right? Like, the market is always going to be lagging behind, so you're always going to have to be dropping money in order to play this game competitively. There's never an ideal solution that appeases both the players as well as the players and investors and collectors for the game. Like, someone's going to be on the receiving end of the sad side. They're going to be upset, you know, if reprints are tanking their value or if there are no reprints for a particular card. So I think it's really, really hard. And I guess my thought is to get the thoughts of the community. Like, are there any solutions? Are there any ways that we can do this? Do you guys like if they reprint cards very, very consistently? Or is this something that you'd rather get some mileage out of your cards before they actually get reprinted type deal? So yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts below. Let me know in the comments. Other than that, we'll see y'all in the next video. Bye-bye.